Well, at least no one got hurt. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R for the first time in quite a while. And unfortunately, it's not the return we would have liked, as the Kraken come off their 10 days off, a long break for the Kraken between the All-Star break and their designated week off. And they're at least competitive against the Flyers on the scoreboard anyway, but still fall 3-2. Now, like I said, at least the bright side is that everyone stayed healthy, and they did at least keep the game close, unlike their return from the All-Star break last year, where they got shut out by the Islanders, I'm pretty sure it was, 4-0, and Burakovsky got hurt for what ended up being the rest of the season. So, could have been a lot worse. But for the Kraken, it's 2 points they can ill afford to lose, as they are in that tight race for that wildcard spot, or one of the two wildcard spots in the West. And all the other teams that are in that race seem to keep winning here on the back half of that All-Star break. Well, not quite everyone was back for the Kraken, as Schultz did end up missing this game against the Flyers for personal reasons, so hopefully everything's okay with Schultz and his family and all that. On the bright side, it did mean that we got to see Riker Evans play again for the Kraken, and he had a all-right game. Didn't really make a huge impact, but it's still good to see Riker continue to get time in the NHL, as he has definitely played well enough to deserve it. Other than that, though, the only other change in the lineup for the Kraken coming into this game was that Cartier did not play, and Yamamoto takes his place on that fourth line, or kind of the spare parts line, as the Kraken lines-wise do kind of return to lines that we're more used to, with Beniers on that first line with Eberle and Tatar, McCann then dropping down to the wing of that second line with Wennberg and Schultz. The third line we're pretty well used to by now. Then the fourth line, in this particular game, had Tanev and Burakovsky on either side of Yamamoto. Which I gotta say, I'm a little bit curious why Cartier ends up getting a scratch. It seems like he's been playing pretty well for the role that he's expected to play. That being said, Yamamoto had a perfectly fine game, so I don't think it really cost the Kraken the outcome of this game. Especially considering that when it comes to the flow of the game, the Kraken were honestly fortunate to come out of this just losing by 1. Not that it really matters how much they lost by, but the scoreboard did make this one look a lot closer in the end than I think it really was based on the flow of play and certainly the shots on goal. And it did look that way pretty much right from the get-go in the first period, as out of the gates, it was clear that the Flyers had a couple games under their belt coming out of their break, where the Kraken definitely had some rust to knock off, as the Flyers get all the offensive zone pressure, and while the Kraken did respond with a couple shots on goal, it's all Flyers early, and eventually that leads to a power play. And for that matter, it's a power play the Flyers end up getting because of a successfully defended, but a breakaway the Kraken have to defend. DeCord comes up with a huge save, and then Dunn gets called for the cross-check as they try to clean up the mess around the net. Either way, the Flyers end up on a power play that really hasn't been going that well for them lately, but nonetheless, about halfway through, they do end up scoring on a perfectly placed one-time shot from the face-off dot by Lofton himself, as he puts it top corner near side over the shoulder of DeCord to get the Flyers on the board first. Now, the good news is the Kraken do get a chance to respond with a power play of their own shortly after the Flyers score on their power play, but the Kraken really never get anything going on that chance or through the middle of the period, and eventually the Flyers kind of retake things over through the back half of the period into the final couple minutes, which includes another breakaway that Joey has to come up with a big save on, and a couple other rush chances, as the Kraken, while they did recover defensively for the most part fairly well, they were pretty sloppy through the neutral zone and in transition, allowing the Flyers to really stretch out the ice and get a number of rush chances and shots on goal. Eventually, though, it's the Kraken who end up evening things up with just about 3 minutes left. They get into the other end of the ice on a rush chance of their own. It's Beniers with the puck going down the right side of the offensive end and into the corner before dropping it up to Larson at the blue line. Larson across to Dunn. Dunn to the middle of the slot to a wide open Tatar, who doesn't even look at the net before firing off the shot and buries it past Peterson to give the Kraken their first goal, not only of this game, but in quite a while. All the way past even when they played their last game, since, well, yeah, the last game before the break, they didn't even score, and we'll continue to try to forget about that game, but Tatar evens things up in this one. It's 1-1 Kraken. Unfortunately, it does not stay tied for very long, as the Flyers challenge for offside, and Tatar does barely drag his skate, at least long enough to have his skate and the puck cross the line at the same time, so they come back with, well, they say they confirmed that it was a good goal. Honestly, I think it's just a stands as called, as there wasn't conclusive evidence that Tatar was offside. But even with the Kraken miraculously getting a challenge to go their way, or a review to go their way, it's the Flyers who challenge it. And with the failed challenge by the Flyers, the Kraken then end up on a power play right after scoring. But on that Kraken power play, the Flyers get a rush chance back the other way with one of the best penalty kill units in the league, and sure enough, they come rushing down the ice shorthanded after a Kraken turnover, and it's just a sneaky little wrist shot as the guy's looking past the whole way, and then just fires off the shot wide open by the faceoff circle. It catches Decord, I think, a little bit sleeping maybe, right through the 5-hole into the back of the net, giving the Flyers their now league-leading 12th shorthanded goal of the season, and it gives them back the lead on the Kraken power play that the Kraken aren't able to score to re-tie things up before the first intermission, which the Flyers then take that 2-1 lead into that first break, as they have now scored on both the power play and penalty kill, while the Kraken have the 5-on-5 goal. So, yeah, special teams once again making a massive negative difference for the Kraken. So we go to the second period with the Kraken down 1, and they nearly tie things up early on as they get a shot from well out to deflect on its way to the net, gets past Peterson, but just goes off the far post and stays out. So the Kraken a bit of a almost lucky but then unlucky bounce. And then from there, the rest of the first half of the second period anyway is pretty much entirely Flyers. I think the Kraken only get one shot on goal in the first 10 minutes of the second period, while the Flyers don't really get anything dangerous towards the Kraken net, but are certainly racking up the shot total. Eventually, things start to flip a little bit more in the Kraken favor as they get a power play midway through the second period. I forgot to mention, the Flyers did get a power play early on in the second, which the Kraken do manage to kill off, so finally something special teams goes their way. But with their power play in the back half of the second, once again, they're just really not able to get much of anything going. They do get a couple shots on goal, but aren't able to score. Eventually, their best chance really of the rest of the game, but certainly of this second period, comes just after this power play as Yamamoto picks up a rebound just in front of the net. He's all alone in front of Peterson and just can't quite get it through the 5-hole as Peterson comes up with a huge save on Yamamoto. Credit to Peterson on this one. He just makes a very nice save on Yamamoto. Unfortunately, that was, again, the best chance the Kraken would get. The Flyers start to take momentum a little bit towards the back half of the second, but we do go to the third with that same 2-1 score. And unfortunately, as they made sure to point out on the broadcast, while the Kraken have been fantastic when leading going into the third period, they've been pretty terrible at coming back when trailing at the start of the third, with just the one win in 20 such games coming into this one, and 16 losses and 3 overtime losses. So yeah, I mean, while you wouldn't expect to win the majority of games that you go into the third trailing, that is a pretty abysmal record at coming back in the third period. In spite of that, though, 36 seconds into the third period, the Kraken get into the offensive end. Schultz makes a nice play along the boards on the forecheck, gets it up to McCann. McCann fires off the shot on net. It does get deflected a little bit on the way to the net, and that's just enough to have the puck go off the stick of the Philadelphia defenseman, over the shoulder of Peterson, and into the top corner of the far side of the net to give the Kraken their second goal of the game. McCann his 21st of the season, and just like that, the Kraken have made it a brand new game, just 36 seconds once again into this third period. And now they have a chance to grab the momentum of the game and run with it from there with those fresh legs that they have after the 10-day break, and now having gotten the rust knocked off after 2 periods, hopefully even completing the third period comeback and getting that second third period comeback of the season to win this game in regulation. Unfortunately, none of that ends up happening, though, as the Kraken can't get any momentum out of this McCann goal. In fact, it's the Flyers who gain the momentum and just never really give it up. A few minutes later, the Flyers end up scoring off of a face-off in the Kraken end of the ice. They win it clean back to the blue line. A shot on goal is deflected a bit on its way. No chance for Decord. It gets past him, giving the Flyers the lead-taking goal for the third time this game. And then the Flyers end up getting back-to-back power plays with a little gap between them, but 2 quick power plays following taking the lead, which the Kraken are able to kill off. So they do at least kill off the last 3 power plays that the Flyers get of this game, even though they let the early one in. Unfortunately, though, they just can't get anything going offensively, so the Flyers continue to rack up the shot total. Decord continues to make saves, but the Kraken get nothing going back the other way. Eventually, they do go empty net with about a minute and a half left. The Flyers can't hit the empty net, but the Kraken can't really get anything to the Flyers net, and yeah, the last few seconds tick off to give the Flyers the 3-2 win. They do almost make it 4-2 with the empty netter right in the last second, but the puck crossed the line a couple tenths of a second after the buzzer happened, so no fourth goal for the Flyers, but it doesn't really matter. They win in regulation, and the Kraken drop a second straight, bookending a long break with disappointment on either side. A lot more disappointment on the start of the break, but yeah, still not the way you wanted to come back from it. So for the Kraken, it wasn't necessarily a terrible loss as a standalone game. They do keep it close against a good team who's top 3 in their division on the road after a long break, which sure does have the benefit of you get a little bit healthier and get your legs a little bit fresher. At the same time, there's going to be some rust to knock off, certainly in the first or second period of the game. I think that definitely showed up in the first period, and maybe a bit in the third, though at that point, I think the excuse is out the window, and they should be able to really be back in the flow of things, especially after McCann ties things up and get some momentum going. They just aren't able to get anything going in that third period, and that is pretty disappointing to see. But even with all that being said, even if this loss by itself isn't a terrible one for the Kraken, at this point, pretty much any loss they have is going to be one that hurts them quite a bit, especially because of that game that they basically gave away going into the break against the Sharks. 2 points that they should still have in the standings, but they decided to not show up for that game and just take the early vacation. And now they've put themselves in a spot where they're headed in the wrong direction in a very tight wildcard race with a number of other teams. Currently, the Kraken are 3-6-1 now in their last 10 games. Meanwhile, all the other teams in that wildcard race have won their last games, with the exception of the Arizona Coyotes, who have lost 5 straight. Though even there, the game that they played this same night against another one of those teams in the race in the Predators ended up going to overtime. So that's a couple of teams getting 3 points in that race while the Kraken get nothing. And for the Coyotes, although they did lose, they pick up the 1 point, which now puts them 2 points behind the Kraken with 1 game in hand. So if they win that game, the Kraken are that away from being tied for the bottom of this group of teams vying for those 2 wildcard spots. And then you've got the Flames, who have now won 4 straight, the Wild, who've won 2 straight, the Blues, Kings, and Predators have all won their last game, the Kings currently playing one and leading 2-0 over the Oilers. So it's not a time that the Kraken can really afford to be dropping the majority of their games, or even dropping games with any kind of frequency. And now they've got a back-to-back coming up here on Monday and Tuesday as they continue their second East Coast, or maybe third East Coast road trip of the season. Now, it is true the Kraken do have the benefit of having, especially after this road trip is over, one of the easiest schedules in the NHL the rest of the way, playing a lot of teams that should be sellers at the deadline after the deadline has come and gone. So that should make their home stretch at least a little bit more manageable than some other teams and opens the door for them to get back in this race. But as things stand, they're 4 points out of a wildcard spot, with the Blues, who are sitting in the second spot, having 1 game in hand still, and the Kings, who have the same number of points, 2 games in hand. Or I should say the Kings have the same number of points as the Blues, 4 more than the Kraken, with 2 games in hand on the Kraken. Although if the result tonight holds up and they don't blow a 2-goal lead against the Oilers in the third period, then they'll have the 1 game in hand but be 6 points up on the Kraken. So it is starting to become a bit of a hill the Kraken have to climb. They have the chance to do it, but they gotta start getting some wins and cannot afford to string losses together. Either way, that is definitely something we will be watching the rest of the season, how those other teams are doing any given night, as well as how the Kraken are doing in relation, at least as long as the Kraken remain in the race for one of those wildcard spots. I do kind of think the 3 Pacific spots are still out of reach, even though the Oilers have kind of taken the spot from the Kings. With the way the Oilers are playing, I don't really see that changing anytime soon. Either way, for the Kraken, they are probably battling for one of those 2 wildcard spots, maybe even just that bottom one, with then 5 or 6 other teams. At least for now, though, let's end on a bit of a positive note with the Kraken 3 stars. Again, as always, brought to you by the patrons over on Patreon, huge supporters of this channel, and if you want to be a bigger supporter of this channel than you already are by watching this point, you can help decide the Kraken 3 stars by supporting on Patreon through the link down below as well. With the 3 stars, the first one I think is pretty obvious. It's Joey Daccord once again for the Kraken. He kept them in this all game long, and sure, he does end up giving up 3 goals, but he gives up those 3 goals on 37 shots, I think it was, just off the top of my head. Either way, another fantastic night for Daccord, given how many shots ended up on him, and at least a couple of them he really didn't have a chance on. As for the other 2 stars, I'm going to agree with Christopher over on Patreon for the second star, that McCann is definitely deserving of that. Obviously, the goal scorer, the second goal scorer for the Kraken, that tied things up there in the third, and otherwise had a fantastic game on top of that. So McCann continues to be one of the best players for the Kraken, as he has been throughout their entire history so far. And then, although Christopher goes with Tatar as the other star, and he is the other goal scorer, I'm going to go off the board and say Vince Dunn for my 3rd star of this game. I think Dunn had a fantastic game. He was easily the player that I noticed on the ice the most for the Kraken. Sure, he is the one that draws the penalty that gets the Flyers on the board in the first period. At the same time, though, Dunn was fantastic. Full 200-foot game from him. And like I said, he was one of the most noticeable players on the ice that isn't named Joey Daccord. So one more time, that's Daccord, I think pretty obviously the 1st star, McCann the 2nd, and Dunn the 3rd. Let me know if you disagree down in the comment section, though, who your 3 stars of this game would be. Obviously not the way we wanted to come back from the break, but how we're feeling about the Kraken chances of getting into one of those wildcard spots here through the back half of the season and the remaining now 30 games that they have left. And otherwise, if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy the video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below to help support the channel. Like and subscribe, of course, so I'd appreciate using them. Until next time, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken. As well as, for the last time, go Chiefs. Hopefully the 49ers lose.